we use the 5 dysfunctions quite extensively. In fact, Mark gave a brilliant little phrase in his introduction there. He talked about a business that you care about. And I absolutely love that as the introduction, because when I first read through the 5 dysfunctions of a team, the first thing that struck me about that whole phraseology was it was about vulnerability. It was about people caring. And it's a very, very personal thing. The 5 dysfunctions actually are talking about becoming vulnerable and being vulnerable in the workplace. And that stands in complete contradiction to everything else we get taught from the moment we start school, and they start showing us how to conform in the workplace or in the world around us. And a lot of what we're taught is about how we defend ourselves, how we build a wall around ourselves, how we challenge things, and how we defend our own position and our own viewpoint. And basically that's what schooling and college does for us, is teach us how to conform and how to fit into a mold. Which means when we get in the workplace, if we want to work in a team, we've already built up a set of, a skill set, if you like, a life skill set of how to handle life around us, how to respond. And we don't even think about that anymore. It becomes an intrinsic, almost reactionary response, a reflex response. Somebody says something to us, this is how we respond to that challenge. What Lencioni tries to do is then take that back down and say, no, let's make this more like a close family discussion. Let's actually open out some trust here. Let's actually make sure that everybody knows that we can show some vulnerability, that we can actually express to everybody around us, I have this weakness, or I've cocked up here, or this went wrong for me. And that's the basis he's coming to this from. And so his first raft there is trust, and that's team trust. And that goes, in his book, it goes beyond the conventional kind of trust in a workplace. It goes beyond the conventional idea that you're going to turn up for work and you can have a conversation with your colleagues. It's a level of trust where you can be vulnerable. You can actually express, a team member can express to a fellow team member where they don't feel strong enough to take on a challenge, where they feel they've got a weakness that they want to expose, where they've got a shortcoming. And it's being vocal about that. So yeah. The first stage he talks about is how we actually open this out, and how as a team we can work together and get to be trusting of one another and start to expose our vulnerabilities. And that's an unusual place to be in the workplace, which is why it's such an important stage. And it's also a process to go through, to open up that vulnerability in a team, that people feel they can communicate with each other. And of course, there's a whole gamut of communication things go around that, because we've got all the different communication styles going off at the same time as we've got all the different character traits going off. So everybody has different drivers in this. So it's not an easy challenge.
Yeah.
But it should be taken from the leadership.
Just a question on that one then, Ian, just to prompt people's examples. Is there, just off the top of your head, a particular area of a business that you can recall where that trust issue might manifest itself, but in a non-obvious way, just in case that reference helps people come up with an example? I'll tell you for why. I don't want this all to be about the senior management team, because firstly, it's not a very big picture, and secondly, it's not as interesting as the example this might trigger for someone, and this is the area I'd like to explore. This isn't scripted, it's an exploratory conversation.
And for me, so the classic example usually comes from, let's give you a better example. Working with an estate agency recently, looking to turn their business around, even in the current climate, looking to turn their business around. And we drilled down into what turnover figures are wanted, then we break the turnover figures down into how many actual sales that needs to be, and then how many sales we break down into how many leads it needs to generate. And then we break how many leads it needs to generate down into how many phone calls does an agent need to make on a day in order to generate that many leads. The answer was 5. You wouldn't think it was rocket science to make 5 telephone calls in a day for somebody who was in a sales role. There were a number of agents who were not able to make 5 phone calls. And what followed was a team meeting around what are the challenges we get in actually generating, for that team, there were 5 on the team, so we're saying to generate 25 phone calls a day, 125 in a week, What are the challenges around that? And obviously we get the usual kickback from the sales team. We can't do it because the technology is not keeping up with us, or we don't have enough data, or the script isn't good enough. But when we actually dug back into it and got some trust running in the team and did some teamwork with them, we then got to the point of finding out that 2 members of that team were particularly vulnerable to rejection. And when we actually had the conversation about their family life, they reflected back on times in their childhood where their parents had labelled them as failures, and they felt they were put outside the tribe if they in any way showed inherent weakness and didn't deliver on the numbers.
Yeah. And on that point, Ian, as an example, I just want to show, because there's a few people active in the board, and I just want to show you what I've zoomed in on. My interpretation of there, you're pinging around, and this is my belief in a business, everything is connected together. So we start from a dysfunction that maybe leads a conversation around trust. It zooms down on the sales team. You mentioned there kind of the money, the turnover figures, the measures. You mentioned technology, and then working back up the customer journey, we've got the number of calls, the team, and the fact there's a challenge maybe around the background or what they're bringing. And by the way, that opportunity symbol there is hanging, waiting to be picked up and used. And the reason I wanted to use that as an example, I won't jump in every time, but I'm really keen to people to explore the examples of where they've seen the dysfunction manifest itself. So, you know, you give us as many bullets on that as possible so people can pick them up, because just in the way I've translated it there, I think this is the way the conversation develops in a really wholesome, organic way. So let's go for it. Is that the trust, the first one of the 5? Is that right?
And trust is the first one of the 5. And the reason it's the first one of the 5 is because if there isn't trust, then there isn't open challenge. I know, Margaret, you brought up the 5 dysfunctions triangle on LinkedIn there, and I just put a little comment on there. The second phase it's called conflict in the model, because if there isn't trust amongst everybody that they're going to look after one another, then they don't open up to have conversations and challenge. And if you don't have open conversations and challenge, then not everybody gets signed up to the overarching goal. So assuming we have an overarching goal and assuming that there's a result that we're aiming for, the entire team needs to be engaged in that. So trust is the first stage of the team to allow everybody to pull together, to actually let them have a fight. It's a bit like, you know, when the kids are having a fight on the sitting room carpet, it's never a full-on fight. They're just, rarely, sometimes it's a full-on fight. Most of the time, it's just play fighting, because they know what the limits are, they know what the boundaries are, and that's what the trust thing is about. It's being able to have a wrestling match and know you can trust one another to stay within certain bounds. And that's what we talk about in the conflict stage. It's being able to have a wrestling match around a board table, around the meeting table in the sales room. Be able to have a wrestling match and frankly, openly discuss the issues. And by having that frank and open discussion, it means that even somebody who doesn't agree with the solution that comes out of whatever meeting we're in, they've been able to throw their opinion in and have it discussed. And just by being heard in that venue, just by knowing they're being heard, they will then commit to the decision that comes out of it. Whereas if they're not heard, they'll come out of there with discontentment.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering if there's a connection there, and with the fact, if you give people these kind of dots to join, is that in a way it's almost setting parameters for that conversation? So you're saying people bring their own understanding of what is and isn't acceptable. What I realise now by you speaking is what I layer onto that with Big Pickies, saying actually these are the different lenses to use, these are the different key elements of the business, like these things are all in play. So it's okay to speak about the purpose of the business, the team, the customer, the measure, the tech, the money in the process, if we want to get on to the challenges and opportunities. I didn't expect that to come out, but that's in a way providing a lens on which things are useful to speak about so you can get to the opportunities.
And it's about opening up the discussion. It's about having an open, honest discussion with everybody, with all the stakeholders involved. And
That's
without the
interesting
open and
because
honest
it may
discussion,
be just the videos that I clicked on, but when I was doing my research for this, I did get an impression which gets my kind of hackles up all of the time because it kind of goes against my values. A lot of the dysfunction narrative was around the senior team. So this part of the business here, the management, the senior management. But I think it's really important to say that that then ripples out to the wider team. And if you believe in the systems thinking approach to the business, then that's got to be true, that these are equally as valid to the wider team as they are to the senior management team.
Absolutely.
Mark, can I just add something? So if you actually start looking at trust and look at Covey's, all of Covey's stuff on trust, it starts with self-trust. So the ripples of trust start with self-trust and then go out to the people you interact with, the team, the environment, everything else. So trust is at all levels, at all parts of the organization. I always describe trust as the glue that keeps us together. Because there isn't trust, nothing else happens, whether that's from management or peer-to-peer or downward management. The trust has got to be there for all the time with all the people. But it's so easy to break, and that's the problem, and that's the challenge for business.
Yeah,
and I think the phrase there that trust is the glue is really, really important, because if we don't have the trust, then we have this kind of pseudo harmony that goes off instead in the place of trust, which is just it's like gluten-free baking. You know, it looks right, but when you touch it, it falls to pieces.
Yeah,
it's you're exactly right. It's the glue that holds it together. That trust, and trusting yourself in the first instance, gives you the ability to be vulnerable. So it's having that self-confidence. So it's knowing oneself in the first place to be able to put yourself out there. For me, you see, there are defined steps in Lencioni's model, but in actual fact, they all come together. So the first level is trust, which then leads to the conflict or the challenge as the second level. Because when you've got the trust, you can start the conflict, you can start the challenge openly. And by having the challenge, that means everybody gets involved in discussion, which takes you to the third level, which is commitment. Because once you know your viewpoint has been discussed, then you'll sign on to whatever the project is, so long as you know you've been heard. And once you've signed on, you've made that commitment, the third level, then you move on to the fourth level, which is accountability. Because you've committed, then you'll be held accountable. And I'm sure we can all think of issues, we can all think of occasions, examples in working life where the commitment of the team members hasn't been there. Yeah. And how often have we gone out to the team and said, right, crack on with that, that's the project we've all agreed on, walked out of the meeting expecting to see massive progress. And how often have we walked away from it and then found out that the team were actually going leaving with what seemed like a different message to the one we thought we'd agreed on. It's a classic tale of this system not having worked.
Yeah.
And then the final stage, so the fifth stage then is actually the results. Is actually once you get that commitment and the accountability, then you get the results that you were aiming for in the first instance, which is how the model works.
Margaret, not reading too much into this, but if we were in a room, and a workshop room, and I had seen you interpret the conversation as we were going, what I might do is say, I can see you've made an association, a connection there at the top between in the relationships area with the team. And so what I would ask you to do is to just explore that connection a little bit and link it up to what Ian's been talking about. Would you do that for us?
Of course. I really like this model too. And I think it's a shame it's presented as a pyramid, because it's almost like a network that it's all about relationships. And the example that I had, there's a team that I've been working with who've been in an interesting position because they're about providing support and change and so on throughout a big organization. But they themselves are really struggling with this whole issue about what you might call vulnerability and psychological safety. So when you are in a team, of course, you can create that feeling of vulnerability and safety amongst your peers. But the minute that you put in someone with the label boss or line manager or whatever, it changes the dimension. Now, I'm intrigued about how teams who then have changes in their line management actually continue to maintain trust, commitment, conflict and so on. Because with this team, it has completely flattened that. So while they're outside their team meetings with their line manager and the wider team, they're happy and totally open and trusting and challenging with each other. The minute you put them in that hierarchical framework, they can't be that way, because the mind is still going, this person is a manager of me, therefore I can't afford to be vulnerable with them. And then what you also find often in these situations is that the system itself, as you were talking about systems thinking, because each team is a microcosm of the whole system, when the whole system is very hierarchical and very dominant, top down, then it becomes very difficult for teams at all levels to behave in a different way from that model that's being sent down from the top. So I see this, and with this same organization, if I sit in a board meeting, I see the same thing happening.
Yeah.
Don't you think it's going to come from the culture at the top? I mean, yes. the team aren't going to, in peer-to-peer, I understand they're going to trust each other, but if it sounds potentially like there's an underlying level of trust in the culture, which probably comes down to purpose and everything else, that they don't believe that they're safe. So the level of psychological safety isn't about the entire organization, is it? It's
exactly.
What's interesting there, Julia, is that I was going to come into you, because that grouping at the top, and clearly it makes it a bit difficult when we're sharing a digital kickboard, but I'm intrigued by this. If we were aware where each other were focused on a workshop board, like you can see behind me, we have that awareness of where we're focusing, and it's almost like reading the tea leaves a little bit. You've brought in that purpose discussion at the top of the board. I don't know whether that's a coincidence or that's a considered point, but in this grouping at the top, and by the way, relationships are often used as partners and suppliers in big picture terms, but because of the nature of the topic today, we've got a grouping here, and this is where I'm probably reading too much into it, but yourself, Julia, Margaret and Tunch have all done some work in a nice tidy way, so Caroline will be pleased. Not a lot of mess going on, but we've brought on some symbols. So if I go to Tunch on yours, you've placed yours in the relationships as well, Tunch, and you brought on a measure symbol and a challenge and an opportunity. Just what was the connection that you were making there when Ian was talking?
Well, Martin, when Ian was talking, I was actually thinking about from my own experiences and how to develop a high-performing team. The trust does not happen overnight. The trust comes from creating a dialogue, and how you create a dialogue with the people that you have is through showing that vulnerability. You know, we are talking about the culture. I think it's all down to the leader initially to be able to show that vulnerability to the team members and to show them it is okay to be vulnerable. We are all human beings, and start the dialogue with them through that, which helps them to feel themselves at ease and in a more comfortable situation to be able to open up to the leader and show their vulnerability, weaknesses as much as their strengths as well. So it is down to the leader's capability and capacity to pick the strengths of the team member and also to pick on the weaknesses to work on as well, and not to focus on just the weaknesses of the people. Also, while supporting them with their weaknesses, also help them shine with their strengths so they build that confidence in themselves, which helps them to open up even furthermore. If people have the fear factor inside them, obviously that will stop them from committing themselves to any kind of accountability, which will take us to the next level of that pyramid. So in terms of creating... I'm going to try something out, Tunch. Going to try something out with Caroline and Sue. I've thrown on, this is a bit random, but I've thrown on a process and technology symbol there just because there are other symbols. I haven't thrown them on for any particular reason, but what they do is they take this principle of trust and they reframe in the way you might think about it in the form of process and technology. Is there anything, I know you've worked together, which is why I kind of grouped you together, from a process and technology perspective, is it too tenuous to bring those in, or actually does it allow you to think about trust in a different frame?
I'm in pondering mode at the moment, Martin.
Good. I'm glad. I did say I would try and confuse people, and I think I just have. So how could process and technology help with trust issues? Is that even a fair question?
Yes. Yes.
In my mind, it's such a human, about culture and about the whole thing about trust is a very human part of how people behave in an organisation. And so I'm kind of struggling to see how, and Caroline's my kind of technology like guru, how technology, because I just think it's people. I think people are very fundamental within organisations potentially could hide behind technology and process, and I think there's nothing more in terms of relationships. I wouldn't want to see process and technology perhaps in the relationships box.
Well, I actually disagree, Sue. Well, I'm just thinking in terms of business development and technology. You know, we've been talking a lot about Microsoft Teams, haven't we, in terms of driving collaboration.
Yeah.
So I've been moving it around because actually I think you've got the team in the middle. If we're acquiring Tunch and Margaret as part of our team, then you've got the technology to drive that collaboration across the teams. And then you can have a process maybe that you capture your leads and maybe collaborate using the technology on potential opportunities. So I think there's a relationship between how those different components need to come on board in order to drive an opportunity or drive collaboration. But I think technology can underpin those relationships in terms of building collaboration.
I really like that, and there's almost the underpinning word and an enabler, which is a great word to use for technology. Yep. So, and that's why I threw it in, but then tried to reach for something, and you've helped me out. And the reason I wanted to demonstrate that is it's not easy for me to stop Tunch in his tracks when he's in full flow talking about something he clearly knows about off the back of something Ian knows about, to throw in something that requires a bit of novelty and different thinking. But I think that's how good things come out, because even though you've worked with Sue, there was that Sue thought this, you thought this, and therefore, and I've used that word yes, and it's well, it was more of a I disagree thing, but it brought out.
It was that conflict, bringing it back to Lencioni.
Absolutely.
Conflict and challenge.
And I'm going to whiz around now, so I'm trying to demonstrate a few things in the time we've got. Bryce, you've been playing down in customer care, so further along the customer journey. So this is where you can totally blow me out of the water and say you were just playing with a digital kit. But what connection have you made further down the customer line with regard to dysfunction?
Just very quickly, picking up on the previous speakers, there's obviously now technology and apps that enable you to monitor your team engagement levels on an ongoing basis, literally on a day-to-day, week-to-week, and month-to-month basis. So that was just a little sort of input to there without confusing the process. But my particular situation is looking at what we did in one of the business studies units that I worked with at a university. When a team had issues for a challenge with customers relating to delivery or packaging or transport or anything else, we would look around and find a non-competitive company and take the whole team to visit it. So we would, let's say that the issue related to some things to do with transport, and it was a consumer goods company. We would take the team that was trying to solve the problem to the best transport operator we could find and get them to explore with that transport operator how they dealt with the kind of challenge the team was trying to resolve. So the process essentially involved taking the whole team to somewhere, either in some cases to the actual customer, and asking the customer what the problem was that we were causing them, the team was causing them, and in other cases taking them to the best best practice in that field and asking them to help us resolve the problem for the customer. But the team went together from, the whole team. So it really enabled the team to build commitment to trying to find a solution.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. That's a very specific example, and that's what I try and get to with this, Bryce, is prompt the thinking with the connection to bring it down to a practical level. And I think that then would allow us, if we had the time, to go off. So there's a couple of things I want to achieve in the time that we've got left. Richard, so far we've talked about the wider team. I know we talked about relationships, and Ian brought up an example of sales earlier. I'm wondering whether this accountability point is more applicable, like who is accountable? Is that more of a senior management team? Was that the kind of reasoning you were playing down in management and admin, or a different connection that you've made?
I think the connection I made was very similar to Margaret's, and it's something that's happened I've seen twice now in the last 15 years. And the scenario is basically, you have an established senior management team. Over a period of time, it develops that trust, and partly it develops that trust because the individual members go through periods of vulnerability that the rest of the team, help them through. People know more about the members of the team over time than they do at the beginning. And in both these two teams, the senior person left. The most senior person, the CEO, was replaced by a new person. And at a stroke, all the vulnerability in that team goes, because here's a new person, and your career is now on the line because there's a new person coming in. And in both cases, the new person then compounded the problem by bringing in their own number two. So they brought a number two from the organization they had come from, and the existing team sort of almost doubled down on the determination not to show any vulnerability, which meant that the new team then had minimal levels of trust working around it. And what happened in the long run was that neither of these two new senior chief execs, managing directors, were able to restore the level of trust that had pertained previously, and both those executive teams in effect disbanded over a period of a couple of years. And in my own personal situation, I was made redundant from both those organizations almost by desire, because I really didn't want to stay in those organizations, and in the end they didn't want me to stay either. It was a very peculiar situation, but it goes right to the heart of that first dysfunction, that we lost our vulnerability because a new person put us all on notice, in effect, that you couldn't show vulnerability because it would be seen as a weakness in that environment.
Yeah. So some really good examples there, and where I think I would suggest exploring those further with a wider team is using particular prompts. And I mean, I use the symbols to introduce that, because I think there's nothing more powerful than having that conversation with the wider team if they're using a kind of prompt and structure to that, which gets that conversation out there, which I think scores to a degree against a lot of the five kind of layers. So I would use the different symbols to get out there and to get that conversation going in the team. And if that brings out some challenges which are emotional and sensitive, I've been in the room when that happens. It isn't comfortable, but it is a conversation that has to happen. And I'm going to time out on this one, but you'll see the opportunity symbol looming with all of these. And I focused it on challenges because dysfunction sounds like a challenge, but actually maybe the flip side of that, and maybe that's a way to come back to you, Ian, to finish off, which is the opportunities which opportunities, based on what you started with and what you've heard in terms of the examples, just maybe an opportunity idea or two as to things that can be an antidote to the dysfunction areas.
The most, and so that has come out from the discussions today, that situation where the new manager has come on board and the team are feeling the pushback as a result of the new manager who's not actually part of the inner circle of trust. then that's the moment for that manager to step forward and start showing vulnerability. Whereas in what we're taught, going back to the original point of what we're taught during school and college is how to conform to the system. And it actually doesn't work. That manager actually needs to come in and say, I'm not the guru of all knowledge. You guys know all about this business. I've cocked up before, or here's a story of one of my failures, or here's some of the failures I've had in life. I'm the same as you. Show that vulnerability. You know, you don't need to reduce your status or your responsibility, your status in the company, but you do need to show that you're a human being, and that manager at that level needs to be able to do that. I mean, the example that was given clearly, it's a cultural thing in the entire company, and that's really what Lencioni doesn't cover at all. Is that it talks about a microcosm of a greater thing, and it really does have to reflect in the culture of the company. This does not work in a company which is highly hierarchical. But the point is really, really valid, that in order to actually make this work, there does have to be vulnerability at all levels. That manager coming into that situation, it's exactly the story that Lencioni tells in the book. Exactly the same story. The manager coming in, meeting a team, and not being able to get that team to engage. And the key to that is actually promoting that vulnerability. So, great example.
I love the interaction in the board in the short space of time we've had, and the connections that people made. And I find with something sensitive and emotional like this, sometimes having that third part, that inanimate prop to direct your thoughts through helps. So I think that's been really good to follow along, and obviously that can grow out. So we use these kind of kits, including the digital kit. It's all the same symbols, all of the same layout, because it works in different sizes, deployed in different workshop facilitation, and then deployed in a people development and business development setting for induction, training, performance, and for current focus and future plans. So I think that's been a great demonstration for me. In terms of re-engaging the team and the business, clearly this is a topical issue for now. It would fit really well in a workshop that is for re-engaging the team, which we specialise in and we can help with for you out there and also watching the recording. And I would just like to thank you for all your contributions.